Hey everybody, coming at you from the Campfire with
Heyo.
Nick. Alright, now, every year around the end of October we do our scary campfire stories. Scary, spooky, woo. Well, I was running out of stories because I don't really like to tell stories from like books or movies or whatever. I like to tell real stories. And so, luckily, I have the absolute positive best story of them all. And I only have one story, alright? This story was told to me by a coworker, and he said because people would know who he was, he didn't want me to use his real name, so let's call him Steve. Now, everything else in the story is true, for real. Real names, everything, okay? So, he told me the story when I first started working with him 22 years ago, and the only reason he told me, he didn't tell nobody else, is because I told him I was interested in Bigfoot and ghosts and UFOs and paranormal and all that. And so he said one day, he said, hey, you're pretty open-minded about the unknown, ain't you? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, let me run a story by you. And now, there's certain parts of it that he really got choked up on. So that's made me believe he wasn't acting. This was for real, what he was telling me. So, on with the story. Steve was married to Amy, okay, and they had 2 kids, and the kids grew up, went off to college, and so it was just Steve and Amy. And for some reason they got to where they were arguing over money. Steve wanted to pay the house off, Amy wanted a new car, and so he put his foot down and he was like, you know, we're going to pay the house off first. Well, they were both working, Amy was working, so Amy decided to go buy herself a brand new car. And it escalated into a huge fight. So Dennis said, I'm done, I've had it, I'm out of here, I want away from you. So he packed up and he answered, there was an ad in the paper by a woman named Miss Wilkes. And Miss Wilkes had a house for rent and it was cheap. And so he called Miss Wilkes and said, hey, is the house still available? And she said, yes, it's still available. And he said, I want to look at it. So she gave him the address and they met there. And he said that they pulled up and it was an older white house, old, but it was in pretty good shape. And it was in a neighborhood with a bunch of old white houses and they all looked the same. So he said, how much? They settled on the rent, it was cheap. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom. And she said, yeah, she said, I used to live in this house. Me and my roommate when I went through college. And then I got out of college and we stayed living there. And we both worked after college, and then I got married, moved out. She stayed in the house, and then she got married, moved out. So now I'm going to rent the place because I own the house. So he's like, well, okay, you know. So gave him the keys. That train gives kind of a mysterious echo in the background, and a person screaming.
No, I think that's a coyote.
It may be.
Okay, yeah, that ain't a person.
That's not a person.
No way that's a person.
No. Anyway. Okay, so he moves in. All right. Now, he moves in.
Close.
Yeah. So he moves in, all right, and he notices when he's looking at his kitchen window, he notices a weird sound coming from next door. And the next door is like a whizzing, clicking sound, like just a weird sound. And so he looks out and he looks, and there's an old man next door, and he's pushing one of those old rotary lawnmowers, you know, like the kind you only see on Leave It to Beaver or Hazel or the Brady Bunch. Those, you know what I'm talking about? You know those old rotary kind? No gas-powered engine whatsoever. So he's out there cutting the grass. He hears that weird sound, and he's just like, well, that's weird. Why is that guy using that, you know? So he don't think a whole lot of it, but he got to noticing about every 2 or 3 days, he hears that clicking, whizzing sound out there. Click, 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 zzz, and the old man's out there every day. And he gets a good look at him, and the guy looks like Dick York, he said. He could pass as his twin. You remember on Bewitched? The guy that played Darren?
Yeah.
That was Dick York, the first guy. So anyway, see, he looked just like him. So anyway, time goes on. This guy, he loves cutting his grass all the time. He lives in a white house. So Dennis loves cooking outside. Not Dennis. Why did I say Dennis?
You're thinking of old show characters now.
I guess I am. Anyway, Steve Steve loves cooking outside, so he buys a gas grill, brand new one, and he sets it out right beside his house. And so as he's sitting it there, he looks over and he realizes it's weird that there's a fence between the houses with a gate right in the middle between the houses, and there's a dirt path going through from one house to the next where people had been walking. And he instantly thought to himself, you know something, I don't like this. I don't want people walking through my property, cutting through my property, or where I'm renting. And so he just noticed that, and he thought it was weird. And so he fired up the gas grill, and he started cooking his hamburgers. And he heard, something sure does smell good. And he looks over, and the Dick York Darren looking guy, he's got his arms over the gate looking, going, something sure does smell good. And he says, oh, howdy neighbor. And he said, howdy. And he opens the gate up, walks through, comes over, shakes his hand, says, hi, my name's Charles Darnell. I'm your neighbor. What's your name? And he's like, you know, Steve. And he said, sure does smell good. And he said, yeah. He said, well, if you run out of charcoal now, he said, I got a whole bag in my shop out there, my garage. And he said, it's a gas grill. And he smelled it. It smells good. Like I said, if you need any more charcoal, let me know. And he said, it's a gas grill. And he said, all right. He said, I'm going back to cutting my grass. He said, if you need some charcoal, let me know. I got it over here. And he didn't even say again. That's 3 times. He thought, is this guy messing with me or is he crazy? He kept saying, I've got charcoal. And I kept saying, it's a gas grill. All right, so time goes on. And, okay, instead of editing, if I edit a long video, it's going to crash my editing program, so I'm going to take breaks. So we're going to take a break here, and I'm going to start it and stop it.
It's time for the commercial break.
Time for the commercial break.
No, if only YouTube's automatic ads would, you know, put them right here
Yeah.
where we want it.
So now, the next day, or a couple of days, whatever, but the next incident occurred is he's out there at his grill again, because he didn't even cook in the house, because it was, you know, I don't know, he didn't like cooking in the house. After a long day of work, he liked to relax, and he said he liked to just relax and wind down. He didn't like being cooped up in the house. So he's out there cooking steaks, hamburgers, whatever. And he decides while he's cooking, he's going to call his son. So he goes in the house and he gets his phone. Now, this was when they first came out with those phones, the cordless phones. It's got the antenna that you pull out. And so he brings it out there with him, and he pulls up the antenna and he beeps on it, and he's talking to his son while he's cooking. And he hears a neighbor leaning over the fence going, I sure do like him walkie-talkies. And he's talking to his son, and he looks over and waves. And then he gets done and he hangs up with it and sets it down. And then the guy comes over there. He says, I sure do like them walkie-talkies. He said, then bring back memories. And he said, what walkie-talkies? He said, your walkie-talkie. He said, that's not a walkie-talkie, that's a cordless phone. And he said, yeah. He said, my daughter. He said, you see that tree house back there? He said, I bought us a set of walkie-talkies like that. She would sleep out there at night. And I kept a walkie-talkie by my bed so that we could talk in case she got scared. And he said, yeah. He said, that's weird at your age talking on a walkie-talkie. And he said, it's a cordless phone. And he said, all right. He said, I'll let you get back to your cooking. He said, and your walkie-talkie. And it's just like, it didn't register. And he thought, has this guy got dementia or is he messing with me? I don't understand this. And he said the guy looked like he was in his 50s, so he didn't think he should have dementia. So, anyway. So time goes on, and there's the deal with the walkie-talkie. And then the next incident that I believe he said was the, I got some cheat sheets here where I wrote it down. I think it was the next one was the coffee pot. He was off on Saturday, and he gets up, he goes out on the front porch, he's going to go out and get his newspaper, and he hears he looks over, and there's Mr. Darnell over there again with his rotary lawnmower. It's like the grass would never grow because he cut it almost daily. So he's like, hey, Steve, how are you today? It's a wonderful morning. Good morning, Mr. Darnell. And he's like, it's a great morning, ain't it? He said, no, it's a terrible morning. He said, my Mr. Coffee's broke. And he's like, oh, I just put on a pot in my new percolator. Come on over and drink some. He's like, he's debating on it. And he's like, I sure would like to have some coffee. But then he's like, this guy's a nut. I think I want to see what the inside of his house looks like. So he walks over there. Mr. Darnell walks in. He follows him in, and he's looking around, and nothing in the house is new. Everything, it's like a museum. Everything in that place is old. And he walks in, and it says, just sit down right there. And he said, and so he reaches up and pulls these cups out of the cabinet, and the cabinet's full of these goofy looking green, orange, and yellow cups with diamonds on them. Looked like from the 50s or the 60s. Just weird looking. Nothing in there was new. And he said, you got creamer and sugar? And he said, you won't need creamer or sugar in my coffee, son. And he said, well, I don't like black coffee. It's bitter. He said, son, mine's not bitter. It's smooth. This is JFG. And he hadn't heard of JFG. So, and the other weird thing is off the gas stove, he had a glass percolator. You know, we're used to those aluminum percolators. Well, this was a glass one. He said he'd never seen one before. So he poured a cup, slid it over. He said, try that, son. He took a drink. He said, that's great. He drank, and he told me, he said, this is the best coffee I ever had. He said, that is JFG. I got it at the Big Apple. He said, the Big Apple, it went out of business 10 years ago. He said, yep, Big Apple. And you just said you got the coffee from the Big Apple. It went out of business 10 years ago. Yep, Big Apple, that's where I get my coffee. JFG's best coffee made. And he's kind of getting mad there because he doesn't know. He said, does this guy really got dementia, or is he really messing with me? I don't understand this guy. And so he said, all right. And he started leaving. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Darnell. And then he looked at him and he said, you do know Big Apple went out of business 10 years ago. And he said, yep, Big Apple. He said, that's where I buy my JFG. And he's just like, man, this guy, I got to get out of here before I punch this guy. This guy's making me mad. You know, because he won't hear. There's no registering. Okay, so fast forward about a week, and he's sitting in there and he's watching football. Steve is. And he hears, and he runs in the kitchen, and there's water coming out from under the cabinet. It's a bad feeling. So then he opens up the doors, and there's water pouring out everywhere. A pipe's busted. So he reaches down there and grabs a knob and tries to turn the valve, and the valve is just corroded shut. So he's freaking out, so he runs outside, and he's looking everywhere for the water meter to shut the main water off, and he can't find it. And he runs in the house, and he runs outside, and he runs in. It's starting to get dark. He can't hardly see. He runs out, so he don't know what to do. So he runs in. Mrs. Wilkes calls her number. Hey, Mrs. Wilkes, this is Steve. I got a bad water leak. I'm trying to cut the water off. Where's the water meter? She said, the water meter is on the other side of the fence. Okay, thank you. Click. He runs out there, and as he's going, he's like, why is the water meter on the other side of the fence? So he's out there looking around. Mr. Darnell's on the porch drinking coffee. Mr. Darnell says, hey, Steve, what you doing there? Can I help you? He said, I got a busted pipe. Miss Wilkes says that the water meter's over here. He said, just a minute, son. I know where it's at. So he runs in the house, and then he comes around the house, and he's got a big wrench, and he's got a chrome flashlight. And he just kind of looks at it, and he shines it, and he says, right there, son. He hands him a wrench. And he's thinking to himself, you know something? This is typical Mr. Darnell. He's got this goofy chrome ribbed flashlight that looks like it was from 1940. So he's standing there holding the flashlight, and he pulls the thing back, and he cuts it off, and you can hear the water stop flowing. He says, I appreciate that, Mr. Darnell. He said, would you mind just leaving the wrench and the flashlight here, and I'm going to go and do something about that? And he said, yes, sir. He said, so he goes over there, and he looks at it, and he doesn't have hardly any tools, so he goes back to Mr. Darnell, and he says, I don't have the stuff to fix this. Have you got anything to fix it? He said, let's go look. And so they go out into his shop, and he's got these like cigar boxes full of pipe fittings and bolts and nuts and things, and he says this ought to do it, and he pulls it out, and there's a valve, and he gives him a wrench, and he said, here, replace this valve, replace this pipe. I think your house is just like mine. So he goes over there, and he puts all this stuff in, and he goes back over there, and he cuts it on, and then he runs back over and looks, and it's fixed. So he goes back over there, and he gets the wrench, and he gets the flashlight, walks up, knocks on the door. Mr. Darnell comes to the door. He says, thank you, it's fixed. Here's your wrench and your flashlight back. He says, all right. He said, you have a good night, son. So he goes home, and he goes to bed. Okay. Now, the next day, he calls Miss Wilkes, And he says, hey, I'm a renter. I fixed that, but it's not fixed right. I want to fix it with all brand new pipes. Would you deduct that from the rent? And she said, yes. If you want to fix anything you fix in the house, I'll deduct that from the rent, the cost of the parts. Okay. Now, I'm going to cut this off just a second for a stop in editing. All right, where we left off last was with the pipes. All right. And so he told Miss Wilkes, he said, if I replace all the pipes, will you deduct it from my rent? Because it all needs to be rebuilt. She said, yes, any repairs you do, we will deduct it from the rent. He said, why is the water meter on the other side of the fence on the neighbor's property? And she said, my parents lived in that house. And she said, they built that house for me, and they just tied it into their water meter. And there was one bill for it. And he thought for a minute, wait a minute. He said, that explains that gate right in the middle of the yard. And she said, yeah, my dad put that gate there. That way we didn't have to walk around the fence. We could just walk right through the gate because they had a dog. And said, oh, okay. And he said, your parents don't still live there, do they? And she said, oh, no. She said, my mom lives with me now. And he said, what about your dad? And she said, my dad got killed in an accident at the rayon plant. Rayon is a fiber or a fabric that was popular back in the 60s and 70s. But anyway, she said he got killed in an accident about over 20 years ago at the rayon plant. So that's when Mom moved in with me. And he's just like, oh. And said, what was your dad's name? And she said, Charles Darnell. And he said that the blood just rushed from his face because he was like, am I in the Twilight Zone? And he did say at the time he wasn't thinking about a ghost. He was thinking about an imposter. He was like, who is this man living in this house saying he's Charles Darnell? And then that started to explain all the crazy thoughts that this guy's insane. And so he's like, okay. And so it bothered him. And he was going to go and confront him, but he decided not to. So he went to bed, and then the next morning he woke up and he decided to walk over there. And he said that the first thing that struck him is the grass was about 2 feet tall. There was vines all over the fence, and the gate wouldn't even open because the vines were growing through it. And he was just like, is this the Twilight Zone? Am I going crazy? Am I dreaming? He didn't know what to think. So then he went, and the porch was covered in dust. The windows were covered in dust. And he went around the house, and he rubbed the window, and he peeped in, and the house was empty. And he said he started freaking out then. He said he said he couldn't explain his emotions. And he was thinking to himself, who was this man? And then he was thinking to himself, I actually walked in this man's house and drank coffee. I physically drank coffee in this guy's house. There was furniture in his house. There was a coffee pot. He made me coffee. I drank it. Went back around to the back of the house, grass 2 feet tall, and said that he went to the shed back there, and he said all the cigar boxes were gone, the pipe fittings were gone. He said there was that lawnmower though, and it was rusted solid. He reached and he put his hands on it and grabbed it and tried to drag it, and it wouldn't even move. It was rusted solid, just left behind, just discarded. And so at this point, he said he was just about to pass out or go to the hospital. And he said he just didn't know what to think. And so he said that he got in his truck and he went to work, and he said he couldn't think about it all day. And he said he wound up leaving at lunch because he was literally losing his mind. And so he came back home, and there it was again, 2 foot tall grass, just as plain as day, vines going through the fence. He looked at the house right there on the side of the house where the dining room was. You could see where he had rubbed a hole in the dust and had looked through, and it was an empty house. And he said, that's it. I am insane. I am completely, totally insane. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be here. I don't want to think about Mr. Darnell. This never happened. And so he goes in, and he calls his wife and he said, "Can I please, 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 please come home? I'll never say another word to you about your car or what you spent on it." And she's like, "Okay, okay, well, I've missed you. Yes, you can come home." And so he packs a few things up and he leaves, and he calls Mrs. Wilkes and says, "Mrs. Wilkes, I'm leaving. I'm not living there anymore." And she said, "Why? Is there something wrong?" And he hesitated for a minute. Think about that. Did he want to tell her, "Oh, well, your dad's spirit has been making me coffee and offering me charcoal and making fun of my cordless phone"? He just said, "I made up with my wife. I'm leaving. I'll pay out the rest of the lease." So he said that he went home, and he never told his wife that. Never told her to this day. And when he told me the story, I said, "What was the address? I want to ride by there." And he said, "Oh, no." He said, "Let sleeping dogs lie." He said, "I ain't telling you where it's at." And so he told me the story again about right before he retired, because I said, "Refresh my memory again." And he told it to me again. Well, then I was with my dad at a flea market about 6 months ago, and I bumped into him, and I told him, I said, "Hey," I said, "I do this campfire thing. Can I use your story?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I said, "What's the address?" And he still would not tell me. He would not tell me. He said, "Let sleeping dogs lie." He said, "You're going to go by there. You're going to stir something up. I know you are. You're going to knock on the door. You're going to knock on the neighbor's door. You're going to ask them if they've seen anything." He said, "Let sleeping dogs lie." So that's the story. Is he crazy? Is there some sort of, did he go back in time? Was he reliving some sort of an event? You know, if the story interests you, look up the stone tape theory. That's when events are, what would you say, engraved in the architecture and the structure and the environment. And it's also, they say that whenever people, you know, get sick and die, they kind of pass on. But whenever they die in an accident or tragically, they don't know they're dead. And so, you know, I don't know. It's more of a mystery than it is scary. In the comments, if any of y'all ever heard anything like this, you know. And honestly, I think this would make a good movie. I mean, this is like really this would make a great movie. Any thoughts, Nick?
It would be like a Twilight Zone kind of a situation. I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and see, the thing is this guy, Steve, was in the Navy. He was a big, tall guy. He was into boxing, weightlifting, karate. He was a he-man. Nothing scared him. And it's like the part when he said, he was shaking when he said, "I drank the man's coffee." I mean, you could tell he was visibly very, very shaken. And he was very shaken when he said that the guy held the flashlight and handed me the wrench. And he just, because it's like that was real to him, you know, that really happened. And, you know, he lived next to the guy for like, I think he said 3 months. And he said the guy was always cutting his grass. And then all of a sudden, you know, he gets off the phone, and the next day the grass is 2 feet tall, and there's no furniture, and there's dust on the windows. And it's just, it's not like seeing a ghost. It's like, it's like seeing an environment. It's like it, I don't know, it's, you know what I mean? It was literally like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
So it's pretty scary, ain't it?
That'd be it. I mean, it could have been a dream.
I don't see how.
Well, not really a dream per se, but something seen in his sleep.
I don't know.
Or maybe just visions.
I don't know, but that is a campfire story. So that's the end of the story, and the campfire's going down, and I'm about halfway out of coffee, and I guarantee you Nick's out of coffee. So,
I'm sad, you know that? I'm just so down that I can't get any JFG coffee.
Oh, believe it or not, they still make JFG coffee.
What?
I guess Nick's out of here to go get some coffee. So anyway, incidentally, I looked it up, and JFG coffee is made in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's real coffee.
American made.
American made, Tennessee. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the story. That is the only story that we have this year. I got a year to come up with another one. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had fun. That's compelling. It's mysterious. It's thought-provoking. you put your theory, your thoughts in the comment section. Is this guy insane? Did he really experience this? You know what I mean? He looked pretty legit to me because he's pretty upset when he's telling parts of it. The part he was the most upset is that when the guy slid the coffee over and he physically drank, he tasted the coffee, he felt it go down his throat. It was real, he said. All right.
I firmly believe he experienced it. He did. It's just, was it truly some sort of like, was it a blip in time and he got to live back when this guy lived? Or, well, I mean, just that the house, the property, as you said, everything set in time with the property.
I don't know. And it leads back to look up the stone tape theory. Oh, and another thing I forgot to add. He never saw Mr. Darnell's wife. She was never home. He never saw her coming and going. He never saw her in the house. If that means anything, you know. So, anyway.
Maybe the point in time he was experiencing of Darnell, maybe he wasn't married yet.
Well, he said he looked like he was in his 50s. Maybe Mr. Darnell, since he was dead, his life was etched in time, but his wife was already living with the daughter. So that's another theory. I don't know. This could be discussed for hours. But
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we better go, though. This fire's dying down. You won't be able to see us in a minute. So take it easy. Enjoy life. If you celebrate Halloween, celebrate it. If you don't, look forward to Thanksgiving, because then you get to eat a lot.
Yeah.
But you can always have a scary campfire story.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Take it easy, and we shall see you in the next one.
See you later.